She loved teaching art, but she never dreamt she would be teaching it in room 28 to the children in a Nazi concentration camp. But that's the way it was in Terezín, which the Nazis called Theresienstadt, a place where a young child once identified to the world in a remarkable poem called "I Never Saw Another Butterfly." Even finding paper to paint on was difficult, but every day the children in room 28 painted. Most were deported to Auschwitz, but a few students of Friedl Dicker-Brandeis, the art teacher at Terezín, survived to tell their remarkable stories.
Henry Brooke Adams observed, "A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops." It was almost as if Adams was writing about Friedl Dicker-Brandeis, a teacher who inspired children in the last place one would expect inspiration and beauty, a Nazi concentration camp. Born in Vienna on July 30th, 1898, Friedl became a Bauhaus artist in Berlin and Vienna in the early 1920s. Joining with another Bauhaus artist in Vienna, Franz Singer, she built luxurious houses, apartments, and shops. But there was also a strong sense of social consciousness on Friedl's part, as she and her partner created projects such as the Montessori kindergarten and the Goethehof. In 1938, Friedl and her husband Pavel moved to the small town of Ronov, northeast of Prague. While both worked at a local textile factory, she as a designer, he as an accountant, she also began teaching art to children from local Jewish families. As Friedl was teaching the children of Ronov, the life of a young Jewish girl in Prague was changing forever. Ella Weisberger was born into an upper-middle-class Jewish family in what became known as the Sudetenland, after the Nazis annexed that part of Czechoslovakia. Her father was arrested. The family would never see him again. After Kristallnacht, it became too dangerous for them to remain in the Sudetenland. She, her older sister, and her mother joined family in Prague.
We were registered as Jews in Prague. We were standing in line and we registered as Jews. And we knew that the transports will come, but where they going, we didn't know.
By February 1942, Ella and her family learned where the transports were going. Theresienstadt.
They took us off from the train and we had to walk again about 2-3 kilometers in that snow to Terezín. And just that we came, they started to separate men and old people and so on. So they took my grandmother somewhere, my uncle somewhere, and we, with my mother, we were put in the Hamburger barrack.
A few months later, Friedl and Pavel Brandeis were also deported to Terezín. Ella Weisberger's mother and older sister were immediately drafted for work in the frozen fields surrounding Terezín. Ella was too young to work. By September, she was moved out of the barracks she shared with her mother to a special children's barracks, L410. It was there that she would meet Friedl Dicker-Brandeis.
Famous people started to teach us, not officially. And one of them was Friedl Brandeis. And that time she lived in the same house, only she had like a little cube downstairs herself. She loved our room. She was almost every day in our room. we were enthusiastic about her teaching and about what she wanted us to do.
The Nazis would use Theresienstadt as a show camp for the outside world. In a famous propaganda film, the Führer gives the Jews a town. Inmates were shown enjoying food in cafes, attending concerts, and creating art. Officials from the International Red Cross toured the camp and reported that the Jews were being treated humanely. But appearances can be deceiving. Even as Ella Weisberger appeared as the cat in the children's opera Brundebar in another famous propaganda film. The transports were taking Jews from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz and other death camps. Most of the children who performed with Ella were sent to Auschwitz shortly after their performance. They were gassed almost immediately after their arrival. How are children able to cope with such a reality? This was a question that Friedl Dicker-Brandeis answered by using art therapy. With few materials, Friedl held art classes to help hundreds of children, many whose parents had already been murdered. Children like Ella Weisberger forgot where they were, even if just for a few moments.
And she helped us tremendously with that we should not think really about the bad things. There were some children that they just had to get it out from their system. But in our room mostly, she would bring a dry branch in a little jar or something, put it in, on table, and she would collect where she could have brushed or something. I remember that she would mix black paint or some color,
In one exercise, Friedl asked the children to draw or paint something from their past that reminded them of a happy time.
Personally, I love to go, through Prague and to see all that. So I put it in the picture. My mother, what she wore about that time, what style was that time.
Friedl also tried to remind her students that there was another world that existed before the hell of Theresienstadt. In July of 1943, just a few days before her 45th birthday, Friedl managed to put on a secret exhibition of the children's artwork in the cellar of barracks L410. She also lectured other teachers about art therapy. As the tide turned against the Nazis by late 1944, and it was becoming more apparent that they would not win the war, Eichmann stepped up the effort to kill Europe's remaining Jews. By late September 1944, the transports from Terezín to Auschwitz increased.
When you think what those kids went through, I still can talk about it, but some of them can't. So I do what I do in memory for those that they can make it. They couldn't make it. Friedl went, I believe, also in October 1944.
Friedl Dicker-Brandeis was deported to Auschwitz. She arrived on transport number 167 3 days later, she was gassed in Birkenau. Her husband Pavel arrived there a little more than a week before her. He would survive the war. Ella Weisberger was one of the more fortunate ones. She, her older sister, and her mother all survived and were liberated from Theresienstadt. They never learned the fate of her father. After marrying in Israel, Ella and her husband emigrated to the United States, where they raised their family just outside of New York City. It is written in the Talmud, "He who teaches a child is as if he had created him." Friedl Dicker-Brandeis created many children at Theresienstadt. Ella Weisberger was just one of them. More than 50 years later, the lessons she learned from her beloved teacher remain with her.
And I think we have to thank millions of times to Friedl Brandeis that we are what we are now.